joining us for this episode of All About PR. I'm your host, Tarunjit Ratan. If you are tuning in for the first time, on this podcast, we speak to experts from the world of PR and communication from across the world and bring you interesting conversations from it. In season 3, we are introducing a special segment titled Media Shots, where we will invite strong and grounded voices from the media community to join us for a frank conversation on communication. Today, we speak to Sangeetha Chengappa, Senior Deputy Editor with the Hindu Business Line, on getting to the story that will help the communication audience understand the nuances of how media selects a story and what they look for in it. Sangeetha has worked with the Deccan Chronicle, Deccan Herald, and the New Indian Express and Express Computers in Bangalore as a business journalist in the past. She has also worked with JWT in advertising and client servicing, NIIT in business development, and with the Taj Westend Hotel in sales. With over 17 years of experience in business journalism and 10 years of industry experience in sales and advertising roles, she brings a wealth of experience to the field. I don't think a lot of you would know that within almost 2.5 years of entering journalism, she won the Polestar Award in 2007 for her stories published in 2006. She has reported extensively on IT, BPO, e commerce, retail, hospitality, among others. Those things you do know. Her personal interests include cooking, fitness, travel, music, and spirituality. She lives in Bangalore with a husband and 2 daughters. So let's add her on. So, hi Sangeeta, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, happy to be here.
I'm so glad that you could take time out to speak to all of us today and be on this episode of All About PR. Before we get started on the subject, I'm curious to understand, how did you get started in journalism? Why did you choose this field?
My entry into journalism was totally serendipitous, believe it or not. I had taken a break from advertising to have my firstborn child in 1992. And during the break, I delved into a lot of vegetarian cooking to make my husband happy, who's a total vegetarian by choice. On one particular weekend, he said he's going to invite all his journalist friends, because he was a journalist those days. He's going to invite all his friends and peers for a vegetarian meal. So, to suffice it to say, the meal was a hit. So, it started with the entire course. At the end of the meal, there was this particular colleague of his from the Indian Express who reached out to me and said, Sangeetha, I'm going to become the editor of a new magazine called Express Computers, which is totally on information technology. Would you like to be part of my team? I thought it was a big joke. I said, what the hell are you talking about? He said, you're a good writer, because he had read some of my poetry. I was a student of English literature. So he had seen some of my poetry, because we were friends more than, my husband's colleague. So he said, I've read your poetry, I've read a few essays of yours, and I think you have a great style. And you worked with businesses. You worked in sales with the Taj Group of Hotels. You worked in NIIT in sales. So you know about hospitality, you know about computer education, and you know about the courses, you know the different languages. And in advertising, you worked with various businesses and in the role of a client servicing executive. Worked with FMCGs and stuff. So I think you love working with businesses. I said, yes, I do. I said, but I don't know anything about information technology except for the spelling. And guess what he said? He said, even I don't know anything besides the spelling, because I'm a science correspondent at Indian Express. So then he said, you don't worry about all that. I take care of that. Industry will teach you, because the industry is new. Right. So why don't you join me? I took a couple of weeks to decide, and then I decided I'll join him. And I do not regret that decision to date. That's how I got into journalism.
Awesome. When was this?
This was 1995, May.
It's been some time since you've been in the field, but things have changed a lot with the media over the last 2-3 decades, right? What keeps you here?
Yes. Okay, so I started in 1995, and in 1996 I had to stop because my husband got a transfer to Delhi. So my tryst with journalism was in Express Computers and hardcore IT reporting was just 10 months when my husband shifted to Delhi, and I had to stop being a journalist, and I moved to Delhi with him and decided to have my second kid, and I took 7 years off from work then. When I did come back, it was in 2004, and then I joined the Indian Express as a business journalist, after which I joined the Deccan Herald as a business journalist, and then the Deccan Chronicle as a business journalist. Mind you, all these papers were general newspapers, and I was writing business on page 13 or page 14 for a general daily. Right. And then I moved to the Hindu Business Line, which is a purely business financial newspaper. That's where I am right now. So that's been my journey in short. It's just been 17 years. So you can't count it from 1995 because after 10 months, I stopped being a journalist and then that was it. And then I got back only in 2004. And they made me start from scratch as a senior reporter. I said I should be a special correspondent. They said, no, you've taken a 7-year break. You had only 1 year in Express Computers. So you should start off from scratch. So they made me a reporter. I said, okay, it's fine if that's what you think I'm only capable of. I started off from scratch after all those years.
Interesting. It must have been an interesting experience to do that. But you know what? I do know that you come from the mad world of advertising, right? So tell me something. Journalism more saner or even a crazy field to be in?
I don't think journalism is crazier or insane. I think advertising was, is, and will always continue to be crazy, demanding, and completely drive you nuts at most times. It doesn't give you a life. It doesn't give you a life from what. And I just caught up with a friend of mine who's a creative director in an ad agency a day before yesterday, prior to this podcast, to prepare and see how advertising has changed. It's gotten even worse than it was then, which I can't possibly understand how. But then I realized with the digital age and social media, I don't think they even have time to blink now. Right through my tenure in advertising, the minimum number of hours I logged in every single day, including a Saturday, which was officially meant to be a day off, I spent a minimum of 13 to 14 hours every single day. Without a single day, without a single exception, I moved from Bangalore to the Delhi office. Delhi was much better because they knew that young women traveling 23 kilometers, so they would let you go a little earlier, but then it took you almost 2 hours to reach home. So net, I spent almost the same amount of time both in Bangalore and in Delhi.
Right. But it must be interesting to see and, observe all the changes that have happened with advertising, media, PR, all throughout. Before we get into the topic, what was your first day on the job like? The Express Computer office, what was it like?
Yeah, it was on top of Pub World, and those days the first pubs had come up. It was very fancily located, and I never drank those days. I didn't even drink beer. I only had lime soda and stuff like that. So ironically, I was right on top of the pub. And another thing that went against me, I thought at the beginning, was I was the only woman there in the team. All the rest of the 3 other reporters were all electronics and communications engineers who knew everything about the hardware and software and everything about computers. I knew zilch. So I was from NIIT, where I knew where it was Pascal, Lotus 123, D-Days. I knew these things. I knew the, COBOL. All these things nobody even talks about it anymore. So day one, I step into the office. My boss, the editor, is just two years older than me. I was all of, I think, 30 years old. He was 32. All the rest were 29, 26, 27, and 25. So the boss was the oldest. I was the second oldest and the only woman in the group. So he said, let's have our first meeting. These are the events that are going to happen this week. We were a fortnightly publication. And he said, these are the events that I would like each of you to handle. So the first event he brought up was, he said, there's conference on Java.
Right.
And he said, let me see who will go for this. So before he could say anything, I piped up and said, I know nothing about motorcycles. Entire group burst out laughing. And they said, do you know that Java is not a motorcycle? It's a programming language. I got really very embarrassed. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And then one of the guys, reporters, very cheekily said, hey, mommy, don't you think you should go back home to your baby? Don't you think it's too early for you to get back to work? Go back home to your baby. That's what he said. And he was 27 years old. I didn't have anything to say to that. And my boss, he piped in, the editor, he piped in and he said, how dare you talk to her like that? Don't you dare talk to her like that. And then he said, Sangeetha, let me explain to you. Java is a programming language which many of these guys in the US, they came up, they developed the language over cups and cups of steaming hot Java coffee. And when the rounds were going around about what the programming language should be named, they very naturally oriented themselves towards Java and said, why not Java? Because it all happened over cups of steaming hot Java coffee.
Beautiful.
He said, that's all. He said, that's all there is to it, Sangeetha. It's a programming language. Don't let these guys get to you. swallowed my pride, I hid my indignation, I bit my tongue, and I sat through the entire conversations after, who's going to do what, very silently. Because when you know nothing, that's the time to acknowledge and absorb and learn, not
Absolutely.
retort. Because who am I to retort there? I know nothing except the spelling of information technology. And of course, I had a very good nose for news. So he said, Sangeetha, all you need to do is have a nose for news. Technology will be explained to you by the industry, because when he started off and when he introduced himself to the Wipro head that time, Mr. Ashok Soota,
Right.
Mr. Soota called his product manager and said, here is this guy who will be the editor of Express Computer. Show him what is a computer. Show him this is a RAM, this is ROM, this is a monitor, this is a keyboard. My boss started like that. He said the computer was explained to me. These are the parts of the computer. This is a PCB. This is the motherboard. This is how it works. This is the RAM. This is the ROM. Everything was explained to him. So he said, my job is not to know about the technology. My job is to break stories on technology, business stories, trend stories, commercial application stories. So that was my first day at work, in short.
Interesting. It always takes a kind person to help you learn the ropes. I think that's very essential. And a humble mind to be open towards accepting feedback and taking in the learnings.
Yeah.
So let's get into the topic. Interesting that you have been through advertising, media, creative field, and your interaction with the PR industry must have been constant throughout. What has been your interaction with the PR industry so far?
I would say that I started in 95 and there was a break. And then when I came back in 2004, I was bombarded with PR, professionals. Almost every single day, I would have at least 10 people visiting me in the Indian Express office in Infantry Road. And each one would come with their own pitches. It was all very new to me because apart from IT, I hadn't done other stories. So there would be people from the auto sector. I knew nothing about cars, automobiles. I didn't know the difference between a hatchback and a sedan and, an SUV and an MUV and an XUV. Then I, by default, became the watches person because I wrote one story on watches and one story on aviation. So everybody branded me the aviation expert. Everybody branded me the watch expert. I said, guys, I don't know what happens inside the clock. I don't know what's the difference between analog and this. I'm just writing business stories on this. And I said, if you ask me about the difference between a fuselage and the cockpit of an airplane, I will not be able to tell you the difference. I had written about a Cheetah and Chetak defense simulator, how they simulate this for actual military pilots to learn how to fly the helicopter. But that doesn't necessarily make me an expert on the mechanics of the airplane, right? Or the helicopter. So my interaction with the PR agencies was all about figuring out what they're trying to tell me, what kind of stories they're trying to pitch to me, whether those stories would work for me. Because many of them had very, very features pitches, and I was a business writer. So I said, there's no hard story there. I mean, I don't know. So they would pitch very feature-ish kind of stories to me. And it took me some time to kind of figure out what I should be wanting to do. So my interaction with PR agencies, PR professionals has been, I think it took off in 2004. It kept gradually improving 2005, 2006, 2007 was when my interaction with these people really peaked. I had some, I don't want to mention their names, but I had some superb people, unfortunately, have all left the industry and have gone and joined corporates. I keep telling them, you're such a waste of the corporate. You should be back in the agency world. They were so good. The kind of pitches they brought to me, and they would bring me pitches that made me think. It made me work so hard. I remember one pitch that was given to me. It took me all of 1 month to work on that pitch because she didn't just push her client to me. She said, what my client is doing could be part of a larger industry story. Amazing thing for her to have told me, because if I'd written a single company story, it would have been lost. I wrote an industry story that took me 1 month to come to because I had to get through to analysts. I had to get through to industry people. I had to get through to academia. I had to get through to researchers, 4 different stakeholders in the story, while doing my regular routine stories and other breaking stories. So after 1 month, the story that came out surprised me so much. And what I still remember to this day is how that PR professional never never called me, never disturbed me, never harassed me, never reminded me. Not a single day did she call up and say, "What is the progress on my story?"
Okay.
1 month later, when I finished the story,
Mm-hmm.
and I called her and said, I have something together, and here are a few questions that I have, and we have ironed out a few things, and I'm ready to let this go. And I asked her in pure amazement. I said, "Why did you not reach out to me every single day like all the others do?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't reach out to me after 1 week. You didn't reach out to me after 2 weeks. You didn't do it. You just let me be. Why did you do that?" She said, "See, because my job is to pitch a story, and once you said that you're going to do it, I know the kind of journalist that you are and that you would do it.
Right.
So why would I want to disturb you in between? I knew you would take your time and you would do a good job." And Tarun, that article got me a national award for IT and business journalism. It was the
Wow.
4-star award. That article, along with another article on medical tourism, these two articles got me my award. And that was because the pitch was great, the backup was great, the support was great. See, I would never have been able to come up with the thought of, that kind of a pitch just 1.5 years into my career. Never. Everything was done to me by this PR professional. I will be eternally grateful to her and the other person, the other guy, who told me about medical tourism and who told me how Bangalore is becoming the hub for medical tourism. So I had to do a lot of research from the beginning. I had to contact Indian Institute of Management to figure out the history. I had to talk to patients. I had to talk to hospitals. I had to talk to analysts. Both the stories took me all of 3 to 4 weeks to do along with my regular job. So my relationship with PR professionals like these peaked in 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
From 2009-10, I saw a radical shift in the quality of the PR professionals that I was interacting with. My relationship with them started plateauing, and then there was a steady dip, and now I barely interact with them. I only interact with them if I'm not unable to meet a client or get in touch with somebody, something urgent. Now there's barely any interaction. I don't interact with them too much unless there's an absolute necessity to do so.
Because you bring a very interesting point. The fact that the earlier PR professional had pitched a story which ticked all the boxes on your checklist. Can you share with our audience, help them understand what do you look for in a story pitch? I think that will help them understand what to pitch for, how to look for a story, and check all the boxes again so that the association becomes more seamless, more pleasant to deal with, rather than it being a constant follow-up call every other day and pushing a client to you.
The first thing that I look for in a story is the business pitch. What is your news pitch? The minute I say, "What's your news pitch?" I get an answer. What did you mean by a news pitch? I mean,
Right.
you can't ask me what you mean by a news pitch. You have to give me a strong business pitch. Over the years, I've been thinking about, how do I reduce my communication to every single PR professional who communicates with me? And recently I've come up with this in the last couple of months. Whenever someone calls me and gives me a so-called pitch, which is actually not a pitch, which is just a description of what their client does, and then they would suggest a relationship building meeting or a bridge building meeting, my response would be, "Where's the pitch?" And she said, "But I just told you." I said, "But what you told me is not a pitch. It is just information about your client. So
Right.
where is the story?" So recently, over the last couple of months, I've arrived at this, and I ask anybody who calls me, after I hear them out, "What's my headline going to be?" And then they are at a loss for words because they don't know what the headline is going to be. So I said, if you don't have my headline to pitch to me, you don't have a story. So I said, if you have 3 pages of information, client information that you're sharing with me, that is not a pitch. You need to have a headline for me. What is that headline going to be? None of them have been able to come back with a headline for me in the last 2 months. That's going to be my story, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So your story pitch has to be my headline.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key things we all, as PR professionals, kind of put our heads to. In fact, when we submit releases to a client, there are always options for a press release headline. I'm assuming that for a pitch to come through, guys, please listen up. A headline is very, very essential. You cannot send a pitch without a headline. So I understand headline is very important. You're saying one. Second, the pitch has to have a strong business angle. Do you also want to add about supporting material that goes with a pitch that makes it to your list?
So it's very crucial for any PR person pitching a story to me. For instance, if it's an IT client I haven't interacted with in some 8 or 10 years, when they come back to me with that particular IT company for a pitch, my most natural question would be, why did this happen? What is the background? So when you are coming to me with a company that I've not, or a sector that I've not touched for 8 years, you have to give me a supporting document which talks about the company's progress in India. If it is a global multinational, when did they come to India? What did they start with? Is it a sales office or is it an R&D lab? How many people do they bring me up to speed with an up-to-date company briefing document? The document along has to be supported with the latest milestones from the time they came, the milestones leading up to the current date, along with some of the latest press releases in the last 4 quarters. That gives me a context of what your story is pitched against. Otherwise, you come to me with a pitch after 8 years. I don't have any background about what's happened. I don't know if they made any acquisitions in India. I don't know whether they've had any mergers. I don't know if they made Acme hires. I don't know how many people they've ramped up their team to. I don't know whether their product offerings have increased. Are they hardcore IT? Are they into software-defined networking? What are they? Because technology changes every day, right? After 8 years, I don't even know if the company is still a hardware company, or whether it's a software company, or whether it's a hybrid company, or whether it's a cloud company. You've got to tell me that. And most often than not, none of the PR people know it themselves. They don't know it themselves. They don't even know what went before, what went after. All they tell me is, I was brought into this account just 1 month back. Now, that's not my problem, right? I started working with this client just 1 month back, so I'll have to get back to you. So the story pitch itself fails at the first interaction with me, because the PR professional knows nothing about it. So then she goes back and comes back to me after 2-3 weeks with all of this. Then again, we start the process. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So before you pitch it, you need proper briefing document about the company. Bring the journalist up to speed with what's happening. If you want that story out, of course, it all has to start with a good story pitch, and then all the supporting documents. The latest, you have to brief me about the company and bring me up to speed with it, with a briefing document and supporting press releases that have come up in the last, talking about the company's milestones, what all they've achieved. That to me is a truly good job done along with a good pitch.
Understood. Guys, listen up. This is PR 101. If you want to pitch a client, you have to know everything about the client. You cannot expect a journalist to do your homework. You have to do your homework first. So, Sangeetha, what are the 3 golden rules that you wished all PR professionals would follow? 3 golden rules.
Okay. The first, know your product. If you're pitching a story to the Hindu business line, know the Hindu business line. You have to know what kind of business stories are being carried. You have to know what kind of corporate stories the company wants to put out, what kind of sectoral stories, which industry verticals they focus on. See what kind of angles each journalist takes. Like Sangeetha Chengappa will be writing very different stories from a Venkatesh Ganesh or an Anil Arf or a Giri Prakash or any of my colleagues. All of us have different ways of looking at stories. All of us have certain, what shall I say, we have our own specializations. We have built up domain knowledge in certain areas. And of course, we discuss with each other when we don't know certain things about each other's areas. But the most important thing is you should know your product and you should know your journalist. You should know what Hindu business line carries, and you should also know what kind of stories I've done. I get a call from a very seasoned PR person from Bombay who calls me in the middle of a very busy day and said, Sangeetha, do you do write-ups? So I said, no, I do sit-ups. That day I was in a very humorous mood. I said, no, I do sit-ups. I don't do write-ups. And I hung up on her, and I don't think I ever heard from her after that. And then very recently, somebody called me and said, from a very, very well-known agency, and I don't know how junior or senior she is, but she called me up and said, "Do you do startup stories?" I had nothing to say to that. I just said yes, and I hung up. Because I've been in startup stories from 2004, and if you still don't know that, I don't think I should be sitting there and explaining to you. Figure out what kind of stories I've done when I'm writing startup stories. What kind of startup stories am I doing? What kind of FMCG stories am I focused on? I do a lot of stories on HR. What kind of HR stories is she doing? What are they trend stories? If you closely observe, I love writing trend stories. I love predicting a trend. More than breaking stories, I love trend stories that points to a particular way. The future is going to shape up in the way we live, work, play. So I'm very partial to those kind of stories. I love technology stories. I love writing on innovations. I love writing about disruptive innovations that address consumer pain points that have not been addressed before. I like global stories. I like to see how India is positioned against the rest of the world. Anything that points to, where India is at this point in time compared to, say, a US or a China excites me. I love writing about innovators, love writing about thought leaders, how they would approach a problem. There are so many different things. And if you track a particular paper or a particular journalist whose story, who you want to write your particular client story, then you should know what that person is looking for. I'm not saying you should know everything about the person. You can pick up the phone and say, from what I've read about your stories, you seem more inclined to this. Would you also consider doing something like this? You could ask me something like, maybe the thought never occurred to me. I've had brilliant PR professionals talking to me and giving me such fantastic ideas, which I never would have thought up in my wildest dreams. Well, I don't mind. I'm open to any kind of idea, because I think the day you close yourself and say, I know it all, that's the day you'll stop being a professional, a truly good. Even today, let me tell you, Tarun, there are so many things I still don't know. I would still love to learn. And when I meet the chairman of a company, I want to give you the small incident where I'm in the Deccan Herald, and suddenly the person who was supposed to go and interview the chairman of a telecom company from the UK, last minute, he said, I can't do it. He chickened out. He's a very senior person. And me, this junior rookie journalist with 1.5 years of experience, my boss calls me and says, you got to go to the Leela Palace and interview this guy. I said, I can't do it because I don't know anything about telecom. You tell me IT, you tell me BT, you tell me anything BPO, I'll do it. Not telecom. I don't even know anything about the basic protocols. I know nothing. He said, Sangeetha, it's an order. You have to do it. You have 20 minutes to reach the Leela. I don't know. I was a bundle of nerves. I reached the Leela Palace. I had 30 minutes for the interview. And there I see this very young looking chairman who was just 1 year older to me. That shook me off. It disoriented me totally because I was 40 years old and he was 41. And he sat down and said, it was very nice to meet you. Shall we start? So I said, okay, before we start, I want to tell you something. So he said, okay, go ahead. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I report exclusively on IT, FMCG, BPO, and retail and hospitality for my newspaper. Unfortunately, the person covering the telecom beat couldn't come and meet you today. So when I ask you a few questions, please bear with me and explain every single protocol that you're talking about, because I'm not familiar with any of the telecom protocols. So when you are answering me and you're talking about a particular protocol, can you please explain it to me? Do you know what he did? He literally kind of hugged me. He reached out to my hands and he shook it vigorously and he said, I'm so happy to hear this. I'm so happy with your honesty. I would be glad to tell you everything about it, because I had a very bad experience in Mumbai, where I've just come from, where journalists have misquoted me so badly because they haven't understood anything that I've told them. And the problem is, they never told me that they didn't understand. They just kept nodding their heads and kept writing stuff. And finally, when the article came out in the newspaper, it was horrible for me to see because I was misquoted. And many of the things were factually incorrect. So that's how my interview began. I told him, I know nothing. When I ask you a question, you'll have to explain it to me. I had 25 minutes left because the 5 minutes I spent saying all this. I asked him also, luckily for me, I had a very strong advertising orientation, but I always believed you're writing for a target audience. Who is my target audience? I always focus my questions not on what I'm interested in only, but also what is my reader wanting to read from the story. So my questions were all, I came up with my questions that way. I asked him about his hiring plans. I asked him about the new technology he's planning to bring into the country. So hiring plans is for all the students who want to apply for jobs after engineering. When they do their telecommunications engineering, parents will want to know where their children could go. And so all my questions are targeted towards what my target audience wants to read. So I have this very strong, focused orientation, thankfully, from what I did before. And at the end of 25 minutes, I came back at 6:30, which is, peak time in a newspaper, belted out one of my best stories to date. And why did that happen? Because I very frankly told him, I know nothing about telecom. You have to accept. If I hadn't told him that, I would have had disaster on my hands. And I don't know. And I think I would have had egg on my face. So I believe one should be, everybody is not expected to know everything. You can't be an expert at everything. So when you don't know, I expect the same thing from a PR professional. She has not understood or he has not understood what I'm telling her. You have to just say, okay, and then come back and do just the opposite. That will piss me off like nothing. If you haven't understood, please tell me you haven't understood. I didn't understand what you said. What is it that you didn't understand? Well, I'll explain to you. One is know your product, the newspaper that you're pitching to a magazine, know your journalist. And the third one is know your client, know what business he is in, what is the competitive landscape he's operating in, where are his threats, where are they coming from, what are his advantages. And please don't ever say that my client's business is the best, he is the first one in India, because nobody is ever the first one in India. So just don't say what the client is telling you. Figure out for yourself where they stand. Read analyst reports. So these are the top three things. Know your product, know your journalist, and know your client like the back of your hand without having to go back to him back and forth for information. Those are the three top things.
Absolutely, and very valid ones as well. So before we wrap up this particular episode of All About PR, what would be your top advice for PR professionals so that they can craft a successful career in communication?
I think it's very important to have self-discipline to make the best of your day and go to bed early and wake up early. Have a head start on your day so that you're not feeling rushed throughout the day, because professions like advertising, client servicing, PR are all very, very stressful. You need to be one up on the situation. You need to be on top of your game. Go to bed as early as you can. Wake up as early as you can. Start your day. And before you start your day, your actual working day where you start making calls, go to the newspapers, I think you need to have a job list. Make out a job list of the 25 things that you got to have done in that particular day. And after you make out your job list, prioritize them in terms of time, in terms of person, in terms of whatever. Prioritize them, and those are the absolute must that you have to attend to before you do anything else. Just don't go about it in a very haphazard way. This has helped me go through a job list. At one point, I had a job list of 157 job lists on a launch date. It was a nightmare. And I was all of 23 years old. I thought my head was going to explode. But I went through it. Before you talk to a journalist, please figure out what have they done before, figure out their seniority, figure out how junior they are, figure out that before you get yelled at or before you get this, because you need to know who you're talking to and craft your question and your pitch based on who you're talking to. That's all I'd like to say.
Absolutely, and that's very good life advice and career advice for anybody in communication to move forward. So, last question of the day. If you were not doing journalism today, what would you be doing?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I would be in social service for women and children, below the poverty line, women and children. Been wanting to do that for the last 10 years. Maybe one of these days something will happen. Dedicate my life to the service of women and children.
That's a very noble cause. We do hope that, at some point you're able to give back to them with the same passion. Thank you so much, Sangeetha, for joining us today for this podcast. Really appreciate it.
I really hope it was helpful.
It is. Anything else you would like to add?
Oh, yes. Please, guys, I've reached a state where I definitely need your help crafting a good story, coming out with a good story. You all are very young, very fresh. You've come from a new world digitally. You all are all digital natives. I come from an age of being a digital immigrant. It's very hard for me to keep up with all the new changes. I'm sure you can bring in a lot of freshness, a lot of vibrance, a lot of new perspectives to stories.
Great. Thanks so much, Sangeetha. Thank you so much for taking all the time today to speak to all of us.
You're welcome. It was great. It was my honor and sure, definitely my pleasure to address some of these issues. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So that was Sangeetha talking to us and helping all of us understand how you can get the story you want. Thank you for listening in. We will see you again in our next episode with another intriguing conversation from the world of communication and media.